Oops, where did you go? Oh, somehow I lost. Hold on a second. I got to find the lecture. It disappeared on me. Okay, now let's try to share screen. It's always good when we start recording after and then can't do the technical part of it. Share screen. I'm still not seeing it. Interesting. Oh, here it is. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so here we are. So welcome, everybody. This is Pathwork lecture number 210 that we're discussing at the kind of Wisdom of the Guide, read a lecture and share and talk about and discuss. So this is one of my favorite lectures. It was delivered April 6, 1973, and it's called Visualization Process for Growing into the Unitive State. So,
can you tell us why it's one of your favorites?
One of my favorites. Can you? Yeah, I'll have to. Maybe you can tell me why too. What was like? So to me, like I see where it can be very tricky, to get tangled up with the idealized self-image. But basically, what the guide is saying is that we have to be able to conceive, sort of something greater that we can grow into, and then it's not something that we should be doing or we need to make ourselves, right? But that the actual having models, having conceived of other possibilities of how we might be in the world is very important in order to transform and move into those possibilities. So if we can't conceive of it, we can never arrive there. And so a lot of this lecture, especially my favorite part, now there's a beginning part, where he's talking about, prototypes and models and things like that. But when he actually gets in and starts describing, what we could visualize as this experience of being in that unitive state, and maybe even I like to use it as a kind of guided meditation, right? To feel into it and to sort of imagine it as a possibility, and notice, of course, where our resistance comes up, right? Because that's always the gold in the work, right? So it's not like that there's not supposed to be any there, but it's like that's what will lead you deeper into sort of going for what it's describing. So before I give it all away, I just want to jump into that part. So I guess we'll back up and kind of cover the first part of the lecture. Anybody else have any comments on that introduction or questions in the beginning?
I'd just like to say that I did read the lecture this afternoon. I was intrigued by the parts where he speaks about finding someone, and modeling yourself after their supposedly unitive behavior. The question, of course, immediately came up was like, well, what if you can't find anybody who can show you the way, then.
Right.
But
and then I think also so many times, our spiritual ideals or models, right, turn out to have feet of clay as well. Right.
Yeah.
Because they're human. And then, so there is a double-edged sword. Yeah. How to find a good model, that isn't, sort of, it's pretty grounded and, it's, I don't know if, I think we have to just give latitude and stay in our own inner authority. And while we have models that we can appreciate and certain qualities that we can emulate or certain things that really resonate inside of us, the guide is saying that means it's really inside of us, right? Right. If we connect to it, it's something already within us. So then that awakens it, within, and we're not supposed to kind of give away authority to these models, but to use them, as inspiration, as ways of, seeing new possibilities again of how to be, right?
Yeah, I imagine it's easy for a model to become flattered by the imitation. How's that saying go? The biggest, how's it, something flattery is most sincere form of flattery is imitation, or something like
Right,
that.
right. Yeah. And
But anyway,
and he says in this, it's not really to imitate, right? It's to take something that resonates outside of yourself, but then make it your own.
yeah, exactly. That's what I've been doing with Bob Dylan songs for like
There you
30
go.
years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I think we covered some good pieces. Let's just go ahead and read what the guide says on all of this, and stop me, interrupt, whatever, whenever you feel you want to. So it says, greetings and blessings for all of you here, my dearest friends. This lecture is another step to help you in a very specific way. The individualized personality in the process of growth and expansion must always evolve toward new states of consciousness and experience. Each stage deepens in scope and releases new creative substance with which to create desirable life experiences and worlds. So, he speaks of this in other ways, and I think it's a very deep metaphysical concept that we don't fully grasp or understand. And I don't know that it's really critical that we do, but if you can, again, sort of use these words to help you imagine or visualize, right? That we are like, the consciousness is a creative thing, and there's a way that as we're evolving towards new states and experience, like we release new creative substance, and that's there to create desirable life experiences. And we came here to bring light and life and love into this place, and to reap the benefits and the harvest of that. So he says, in this way, more of the abundance of the universe becomes available to the individual. And he says, you all know that visualization is quite essential to the greeting and recreating work you do in meditation. Creating and recreating work you do in meditation. Unless you can visualize the state you are to grow into, it is hardly possible to reach it. It is different.
Sorry, Darlene.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if I've ever heard him say that, but I haven't read all the lectures, so I'm sure it's in some of the ones that I've missed. Is that right? Like
when he says he said it before,
right? That visualization is key
essential to the creating. Yeah, I don't know that it's something that like he alludes to a lot of things, and almost every lecture includes almost all of the aspects, but they are different, I don't know, like sort of compilations of aspects of the diamond, facets of the whole. So it's fine. Do you feel like somehow you're supposed to have already gotten this or known this part?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Does he talk about visualization, or is that like, oh?
I mean, there is a lecture, but basically maybe, like when he says that, here, I think he's using it in a very generic sense, right? There is a lecture on, visualization process and meditation, right? And so there is another very specific lecture on visualization. But in this one, I think, just see it as, again, you have to kind of be able to imagine something in order to manifest it. So it's not necessarily that you have to actively do some process of visualization, but like when you are in a place, to dream about, forest gardens becoming mine, that was like, a kind of visualization, coming even here to the earth walk, right? It was like having the idea of something I wanted, and wanting to, manifest something. And you have to, I didn't visualize this exact place, of course, right? But I had to put out to the universe, right, that, I was looking for, this place to, offer these gifts that I had. And I didn't even know how it could come about, but that was this, like calling inside. And then to the degree that then we arrive and then we start visualizing, like now the whole group is trying to visualize how we can use that land and what goes here and where, right? So there's all kinds of ways of visualizing. So is that answering the question, or is there something I'm missing?
Yeah, no, I think I got it. Thank you. And I will look up the lecture, and that might help me a little bit more.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, again, the mind has to transcend itself. So we have to be able to have an idea or a concept or a vision of some kind, whether it's a visual vision or it's a, mathematical vision, or it's a, dream kind of vision that comes to you, all of those things are just an inner gut feeling, right? Of what you're going for, and sort of like Michelangelo, cutting away the rock to expose the, beauty of, King David or whatever inside of the rock, right? There's many ways. I don't know whether he could actually see that while he was carving, but somehow that a lot of times we're visualizing when we're, just removing that which we feel like is not what we're looking for.
I
Right.
have a terrible feeling that I'm feeling so oppositional to this lecture. I am going to stop you on every paragraph and tell you something.
Well,
I will
rather
try to
rather than do
refrain,
that, see if
but
you can tell me a little more about why you're in rebellion with it, or what do you imagine that it's saying to you that you're feeling like you don't like?
I almost feel like there's it's more like a feeling as opposed to like in intellectualization. It's not really a thought. It's more
Okay.
like there's, when you walk your dog and he doesn't want to go this way and he puts the brakes on.
Right.
That's what's
Okay,
happening
good.
inside of my chest. And
Okay.
I don't know why yet, but it's making me itchy. So I'll try to stop disrupting
Well,
everybody.
no, I mean, that's fine. What I would suggest, is like, okay, so that's perfect, right? This is something unconscious. So it's okay that you haven't been able to translate it yet. But if you stay with the itchy, don't run away with it, run away from it, and just stay
Right.
curious, because there's this way that the guide says our feelings are unthought thoughts, right? And so there's a feeling that's coming up in you, and the more you hang out with it, the more it can maybe configure itself into the consciousness that's there. It's saying no, right? Obviously, because you're feeling the resistance, right?
Yeah.
So play with that. No, 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 what? No, what's no to? What feels threatening or dangerous or unokay to me here? What is my unconscious no responding to? And see if you can find, as we're just going through this, just kind of
Sure.
sit with that and see if you can articulate it at some point, right? It should reveal itself, because it's something, there's something here probably that is a misconception about what the guide is talking about, because when we have, these misconceptions, we think, he's telling us we have to die, right? And then we're saying, no, I'm not dying. Right. So, probably you're not really going to be dying if you visualize, or if you, open to evolution, of growing past where your consciousness is.
Okay. Thank you. Good priming. I'll give it a shot.
Okay. So he says, attitudes, ways of being, and patterns of behavior have a particular power to influence us. we might almost say they are contagious. And I think we kind of have a sense of this more and more in our modern world as we, are more exposed to mass movements and energies and, kind of contagious patterns of behavior and attitudes and ways of being, having a particular power to influence us. And this applies to both positive and negative attitudes and behavior patterns. Even feelings and the states they create can be contagious. Does everybody align with that, recognize the truth in that?
Yes.
And it is known that some people's opinions can influence others enough to make them adopt the same opinions. This entire process of influence through exemplary figures leads to imitation, emulation, and identification. All of this can exist on a quite conscious, deliberate level, or on a very subtle, subliminal, and involuntary level, depending on what figures are chosen to identify with, to adopt from, or to emulate as prototypes for a new state to grow into. So the freer the soul and the less encumbered by distortions, misconceptions, negativity, and destructive impulses, the more reliable become its choices. And in some other places, he says, the more we know ourselves, the more we recognize other people, and so the more reliable our, antenna is about, who's, who can meet and hold the space of love, right? So as always, the beginning is the hardest. And in this case, one's own distortions may lead to choosing false heroes. And at the same time, make one utterly blind to the really desirable aspects of a possible exemplary figure because the concepts are lacking. Right. So I think, in some ways, like the heroic level of the journey is, the warrior or the, the winner, so that oftentimes in the beginning, our false heroes are, the cool people that always seem to win or be on top, right? That they're the strongest, they're the best in whatever they do. Right. And, in some ways, again, there could be something within us that, resonates with, their talents and their capacities. So it's not always distortion. It's like everything else. There's usually mixed, currents of both distortion and divinity. But, oftentimes, if our consciousness is not so evolved, right, we're choosing egoic levels of pleasure that we think we can get by being powerful or some kind of hero in the eyes of other people, so we can be special. And so this kind of thing, at the same time, he says, can make one utterly blind to the really desirable aspects of a possible exemplary figure, that's maybe more humble, maybe more, quiet and receptive, right? Rather than out there. So, we oftentimes in the masks, the guide talks about how the power mask has contempt for the love mask and the love mask has contempt for the power mask, right? And those are sort of the two sort of exemplary masks, right? Like, oh, let's be perfectly powerful and then we're wonderful. Let's be perfectly loving and then we're wonderful, right? And then the two masks are fighting with each other, and then the serenity mask comes in and thinks that he's above them all. So, it's like, again, this is not talking about masks, right? And this is where I think a lot of times it kind of treads this kind of line or edge, between the ego's tendency to, sort of want to emulate and adopt as a mask and use as a defense, rather than to, cultivate and develop qualities within ourselves that we admire in other people or we see, in exemplary figures somehow. And of course, younger people, this is probably more critical. There's a certain period of time when, we're trying to figure out who we are, right? And trying on different possibilities and stuff. So, it's part of being human that we're looking outside to understand ourselves. But it is important, right, to have it resonate, and then to realize that, we can't just fake it. We have to develop it within inside of ourselves. So individual personalities choose their parents and environment on the basis of this principle. So this is where he's saying in the soul journey, right? We actually are choosing and creating the situations, the parents, the environment for each incarnation. And then we would want to have proper exemplary figures, right, that kind of set off the spark of recognition. I think some of you in the Dying into Life program, talked about with Michael Mead, and his thing, he talks about, this the golden moment, right? Something happens early on that we sort of get a spark of recognition of something deeper and more interesting and exciting that, is within us. So, says when we do this in a truthful and creative way, it never means falsely aping or giving up one's own uniqueness, right? Quite the contrary. The emulated ways of being, traits, and attitudes are adapted to the uniqueness of the seeker who incorporates these universal aspects into his or her own self-expression. And this is the other thing that's kind of true of the divine, qualities that we want to emulate. They're universal qualities, right? And then each one of us has like rays or aspects, and some of them are more dominant in us, and some of them are, sort of more regressive. But depending on what we want, we can, bring out and work with any of them. So he says, you remain totally true to yourself when you emulate someone in a real and creative way. Right. Did that feel, I think your example of, Bob Dylan's songs and, like that resonates in some way for you, Crank?
Totally.
Yeah. So he says, all parents are prototypical figures to their children. Strong rejection of a parent or of a particular of particular traits and attitudes in the parent is an indication that a deliberate negative identification took place. So this is also an emulation, right? But it's like a real, an aping which the self now blindly battles. So, because the real problem hasn't been recognized, and often, like we can't stand to be like our parents, and we are, and so like we're hating and blindly battling against our own, already sort of this unconscious negative identification that's there. And to the degree that the parents and the child are healthy and purified souls, the child will then identify with their positive aspects. The child will recognize what traits in the parent and later in other authority figures are to be used for its life plan, and what traits are to be rejected. The child can do this only to the degree that is receptive through its own power to know the truth. So come back to Judy for a second. Judy, is any of this, how are you doing? Is it getting any clarification, any of this triggering things now or no?
The resistance is still here. I'm not triggered at all. I can certainly identify how our family was not like a healthy soul family. So yeah, nothing yet. Nothing's come up yet. It's all
So like as we're reading, no big charges coming up, but just this general low level of resistance or medium level of resistance. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
as soon as something pops, I'll
yeah,
let you know.
did you read all the way through it? I'm assuming that there's something in here that triggered it, but
yeah,
maybe we'll get to it yet.
yeah, it was later on that I got me really fired up. So
okay, so we'll get to
comes
it
up.
probably in the future. Okay. So conscious and or unconscious identification, which forms an inner image. I don't remember where I stopped off. Was it up here? Yeah, I think I read that. Oh, I know.
Negative
Negative
identification.
identification, right? Yeah. Negative identification leads to the creation of images. We use the term images in the pathwork to define misconceptions and generalizations, which form very limited and fixed closed systems. Conscious and or unconscious identification, which forms an inner image, always creates a limited vision that precludes seeing available alternatives. This false vision excludes so many important factors. So it's kind of like this is where we're projecting, right? Onto a present situation from a limited past situation, right? And we can't really even see what's really optional or what's really going on or new possibilities because we're still living out this old one. And back then, we didn't have a lot of options. We were unconscious children and just trying to survive, right? So we were on survival function and just trying to figure out, how to get our needs met. And so there's all of this, process that comes up when we, are being activated in an image, right? That is exactly what he's saying, right? We're lost in this kind of particular worldview. And oftentimes other people around us can, sense it and see it, but we often can't, right? It seems like the only way it absolutely has to be. Positive identification can never lead to an image. Instead, it leads to visualization, which is a flexible, realistic, wide open system with many alternative ways from which consciousness and creative action can spread. On the spiritual path, you come to a point when you must know that you need positive identification with a realistic, open, and freeing prototype. You need to recognize external exemplary models. If you cannot yet, you need to first build an inner concept. And sometimes maybe there's not something outside. So, you can go to an inner concept, maybe somehow inside of you that you is how it should be, right? Deep down. So if you can visualize both inwardly and recognize outwardly exemplary figures, later you'll become such exemplary figures yourselves to inspire others on their path when they are ready to see truth and to conceive of themselves according to their indwelling potentials. A true exemplary figure inspires you to visualize similar traits and attitudes dormant within your deeper self, which can then be brought into full expression.
You know what's interesting about this, Darlene? For lack of enough actual exemplary figures to recognize, we create them like in superheroes.
Mm.
We create heroes in the stories that we tell, so that we have figures that we can emulate. And I'm thinking as I read this, the ultimate figure, the ultimate hero is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's the guy who in the end surrendered and said, "Thy will be done," which is what the guide also comes to a little bit further on in this lecture. He says, you have to get to the point where, you surrender to the greater powers and let that will be done. It's interesting, very interesting.
No, I agree. Yeah, exactly. And, it is, like the archetypes as well, right? That you're referring to, and there is, like in some ways that Christ archetype maybe, or the Christ consciousness or whatever, like again, lives in all of us, right? And yet, like the guide said, was, it demonstrated, an expression that was, there before us that we could know and see so that we could visualize this possibility, right? Otherwise, we would not be able to conceive of of a unitive option here. And I think he was one of them. And there are other spiritual leaders as well. And, many people, that we might, at least in part, see where they hold a certain, peace or a certain wisdom or a certain, capacity for love, right? So
Yes, that the one they called Neem Karoli Baba was his name. Gathered a lot of people in India in the 70s. It was a big, the guru thing mentality, the thing that people want a guru.
right.
They love to follow a guru. They want to see somebody who's a shining ball of love and light.
And right. And that's, that's where it has both its dark and its light sides. We need that. And then, people project it outside and don't own it. Right. And just want to worship, it's the same thing that happened to Jesus. He didn't say worship me. He said, follow me. Right.
Right.
And everybody wants to, it's too hard to follow them. Let's just worship them and put them on a pedestal. And that's different than what he's saying. This is the follow me part. But yeah, there, and we did, we needed those gurus to break open the possibility, like in the 60s, right? That and drugs and LSD and like all of a sudden cracked open the cosmic egg of reality, right? In the way that at least Western culture had understood it. So yeah, and then I think in the fairy tales, I love Michael Mead, like he's always talking about the hero's journey and the, the way that, we embody sort of our own inner hero, right? And we have also our guides and our demons and our guardians. And so I think it's like a path that we need also to feel like, like a mission. I know I was doing the program on my radio show on visualization and read some of this on that as well. And we were talking also about this sort of, way of, well, now I lost my train of thought. Oh, well, maybe it'll come back. But yeah, there's just a way that to go for something, we have to feel it within us. And then like we have like the vision, it will lead us to the mission in some way, I guess is what I was going for, right? Because behind the things that are inspiring us or, that touch us in some way that we want to emulate, that we want to become like, then that often leads a sense of, what we can give to the world and what, what we want to offer.
Yeah.
So
it'd be easy to, while reading this lecture, it would be easy to fall into the feeling of like, oh my God, I don't really have a great visualization yet. And I really don't have an exemplary figure to follow, except for maybe Jesus or Buddha. And God knows I can't be like either one of them. So, it's hopeless.
Yeah. That's the other danger, right? I mean, that's partly why we decide we want to worship him instead of follow him. Yeah, no, exactly. And it's tricky here, right? So this is part of where I feel like it's important to realize that it's like the ego takes it on, oh, I'm supposed to do that. Yeah. Right? No, you can't do that. You can appreciate it. You can admire it. You can, sort of see in moments maybe where you might be able to channel it, or maybe some moment calls it forth out of you, right? Like there's, an intense situation and all of a sudden you find yourself being, in a leadership space or doing something, more from this place of deep open-heartedness or something than, ordinary. And those things come by grace, right? This is not something that the ego can, figure out and make itself do. It can, keep holding the image, not in the negative sense, but the visualization, in the light and keep affirming it. One of my latest hymns, right? that just came as kind of similar to this. And it's saying that we have to just keep affirming it, right? And then forgive us when we can't quite get there and help us get there, right? So there's not like some kind of thing where we're bad because we're not doing it perfectly yet. Let me read this, maybe it's useful. It says, "The time arrives and I am here. May this mission grow now strong and clear, dedicated to respect for all life. My professora mother, show me how." My teacher mother, show me how. "Remind me to settle down, to pay attention and to look around." Like I've been praying for that for, like my whole lifetime, right? And so I just need to keep praying for it, because I see in the visualization of the potential, person that I could become, one of these days, like much more attuned, much more present, much more full of grace, right? And so I just want to ask for that so that I can shine with love, peace, truth, and harmony, reflecting always the universal reality, right? The gift to me. And then when the tests of the day are done, right? Because life is always going to test us and we're always going to fail, right? It's part of the learning curve. So when the tests of the day are done, forgiveness for the times I grabbed my gun, right?
And wanted to shoot myself.
Right. and then it says, "Forgive me, show me, help me to know me, so I can heal and align with you." So without the forgiveness, without the willingness to face and feel and see, both where we don't quite resonate to, where we're not able to hold the truth of the, visualization of what we want, without causing shame, without causing self-judgment, without causing, anything other than seeking the forgiveness and the prayer and the realignment, the recommitment. I see again, that path doesn't lead me to much usefulness, right? I choose once again to try to learn even better, more love, more compassion, more calm, more presence. And I think in those things, again, it's not something that the outer will can make happen. We just have to keep aligning with it, calling it, praying for it, visualizing it, and trusting that the grace of the universe wants to give it to us as much as we want to receive it. And we're just sort of in this caterpillar to butterfly transition process that who knows how long will take. But we're not bad for being wherever we're at in each moment. And there's always the life force that is pushing within us and pushing around us to that evolutionary, movement. So anybody else want to say anything more here?
Yeah, what was resonating with me about the worship versus follow was that on some level, kind of reflected to the times that I've done that in my own life. And I noticed there was both not thinking that I had that in me. So it was too far out of reach and just not possible. So there was a kind of like, how do I follow this person who is so much further ahead of me that I can just maybe pick up, whatever they're dropped from their mouth and just kind of nourish myself with that, because I don't have it in me. But also there's on another level, there was a part of me that didn't want to do the work requiring myself to get there. I didn't want to give up certain things, or didn't want to discipline myself in a certain way and give up some of my patterns that were fueling, other parts of me, like the power part or the kind of pride, ego part. So yeah, there's a bit of like, if I'll have you do the work, or like I'll just kind of take things away from you and you'll maybe help me change somehow. Like, I hope you can be kind of like a father figure to me and guide me out of this. And so I don't have to do the work, but maybe you can kind of do the work for me.
Right, right. And it is. I mean, there is that lower self-temptation, right? Or this, way that we kind of hope that, we can just sort of magically get there without. And then the other side of that, is, oh, then I should, make myself discipline myself, drop all my bad habits right all away, and that also does not, I don't think, lead us where we're trying to go. There's this kind of interesting, place of true discipline, right? That is coming from choice, right? Again, that the outer will versus the inner will. And so the best remedy really for that you're describing, Jacob, is, that it's gonna not get you where you want to go, right? So after a while, eventually, hopefully cause and effect will sort of break through into consciousness, and you might, recognize that, you're still suffering, you still don't have the results that you were hoping to get. And that, is sort of what guides us, right? We keep trying in all of the wrong ways and it doesn't work. and so eventually, we do sometimes, mature enough or decide that we want to, really make a deeper change because there's some deep calling from life in some way that's asking. And so we come to it from a different level. And I think that's when sort of the miracles happen or the change begins, right? But it can't happen, without recognizing the consequences of our wrong choices. And so the biggest thing that will inspire us and motivate us, and not from a you should, outer discipline, but from an inner longing and choice to do it differently, is when we see and feel our creation from this other place, right? That didn't work. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Sure. Absolutely. And that's part of it for me, but I also noticed that on some level, the child aspects of me kind of check out when time comes to, deal with the consequences, and then they will almost stay blind to it, and then they'll repeat the same pattern the next day, or the week from then. So it's almost like I remember in one of the lectures, I don't remember which one, but it's a guy was talking about like taking the healthy ego part of you to educate the unhealthy, right? Taking the honest part to educate the unintegrous part.
Exactly.
And that really resonated with me because I can see that separation fairly clearly.
Right. And you're seeing it, the beauty of it. Most people don't even recognize, the subterfuge of the, lower self child and how we're avoiding or, trying to get away with it or have our cake and eat it too. It's like we always are. Right. So and yes, to have a healthy self-recognition of that. And then that's kind of like, okay, from there, that's the next really critical moment, I think, is from that recognition, then what is the approach that would attempt some form of discipline around this? Do you have a sense of like how what you would, so then, okay, you recognize this and you recognize that, you want to try to somehow transform your child from doing it this way, or confront the child or hold the child while they're, so that they can face and feel something that they're avoiding, so it's kind of like once we recognize that we are avoiding, then like we can, for me, I'll either come at it, from my outer will that says, oh, you're bad. Like, let me put your feet to the fire and show you what you're doing, and face unto this. And it's kind of like an aggressive place that is kind of judgmental of the child, right? And so the child is going to rebel or get freaked out or something. So that's the piece that always feels sort of like, okay, we recognize this. And then if we recognize that, even the lower self child is just a child, right? And needs, like you said, guidance, needs correcting, needs helping and healing. Then there's a different approach and attitude that actually can kind of take the child by the hand and support it in going in that direction that we want to go in. So that sounds like what you were saying, right?
Yeah, it's yes, that is definitely part of it. The other part is that what the tool that works for me is when I show it to myself, like when I see what the pattern is based on, what kind of belief or what kind of false idea it's based on. It almost like it waters down the charge of it. Next time I do it, it's not as intense, because on some level I'm like, oh, I see, this is what I'm after, and on some level, part of me recognizes the pseudo solution part of it, that it's based on just a false premise, and I'm going to be going in circles, and so that releases the charge. It doesn't always get rid of it, but I think sometimes I don't go deep enough with some of these things. I don't feel it deeply enough, don't recognize it deeply enough. But with some of the things that I have, I've noticed really big shifts in how much less of a charge there is and pressure there is behind it. So, yeah.
Exactly. Good. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a thing I think that, as we, really see the child, it's like we often see the wound underneath, or the, the struggle, or just, it's misconception, and it's just lost, and so we can open our hearts to it and feel some compassion there as well, and see where it's just not in reality anymore, or, the reasoning mind can help a lot, and it is sort of like the child doesn't know what often we know. So it really literally helps to go in and speak to the child and tell that child, that you see a different, what you understand, and help, help it realize that it's not at fault, and it's, just lost and confused. So yeah, good. Excellent stuff. So I've kind of accidentally hit this thing, and so I'm not sure where we were. We've done that. I don't remember reading this, but it seems like we're past this somehow. That we won't imitate something that is foreign to our nature. Oh yeah, I do remember that now. Yeah, we're past this. Okay. That's where we get into the surrender.
Blocks and fogs. I think that's where we were.
Where was it?
I know, just went, it's going too fast.
I think we were just
blocks and
before the-
fogs. Yeah, that one. I think that's where we were. This paragraph here. I mentioned before that the blocks and fogs are created by illusion. I think, does that sound familiar to anybody else?
But I'm not sure where that is on my thing. Is that, what page are you on?
It was just on the screen.
On that
there.
screen?
I mentioned
Oh, I'm
right
not
there in the
seeing
middle
it.
of the paragraph. It says it's page 3 of 13.
Right.
You will initiate something that is foreign in your nature. If you
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's where I was reading before, right?
So.
But I thought we had, let me see. So, okay, so you must pay attention to this necessity and conceive an inner vision of what a unified, harmonious, integrated person who expresses contact and unification with the divine self is like. Yeah, so, we haven't talked about positive identification with the divine self yet. Let's just start here. So I guess this is where we, whether it says truthful perception of exemplar figures can only exist when you are already relatively free, open, and aware of yourself. And then suddenly something will click in you, a spontaneous, almost automatic, organic desire to develop in the same direction as your example will spring up in you. You will not imitate something that is foreign to your nature. Basic universal traits exist and are expressed in different ways by each unique individual. So you do not emulate to make an exact copy of a trait, but rather adapt it to your unique individuality. Somewhere along your path, you will have gained sufficient self-awareness to have subliminal understanding of what is worthy of emulation. I think we did do this part. So now he's going to draw us a picture of what it is like inwardly as well as outwardly to come to the point where the personality truly unites with the inner divine self, with the inexhaustible wealth that is every human being's inner nucleus. This lecture is just an outline that describes certain very basic conditions and expressions which can safely be generalized and applied to all of you who have reached the state where your divine self is being continuously expressed and actualized. And I would say, you know, like even intermittently, right? Because we get a sense of this through sort of the intermittent moments when we arrive there too. I will try to give you a concept and a vision so that you can begin to see with fresh eyes and perhaps recognize in others what you had previously been blind to. When individuals come to the state of deliberately and consciously choosing to commit themselves to the divine will and reality, then the groundwork has been laid for certain vital changes to occur in their inner and outer lives. This is a commitment to the all-consciousness indwelling in every creature. It can be called by any name you choose: God, universal consciousness, the real self, the inner self, whatever name you give to that which transcends the little ego. When this wholehearted commitment is made totally, then certain things begin to happen in one's life. Obviously, one reaches the state not by crossing a sharply defined line, but through a gradual process. Some of you may be committed to God on a conscious level, but you may not realize at all that there are other levels in you where this is not the case. Consciously, you may be full of goodwill and really mean it, but unless you have come to experience the contradictory levels within you, where you do not wish that, or where you only wish it on your own ego terms, which defeats the very act of self-surrender you will want to balk. Unless you acknowledge your contrariness, fear, self-will, and pride, your conscious commitment will always be blocked. Unless you own up to the contrary ego level hidden behind your goodwill, you may not even understand why certain results are still lacking, despite your conscious commitment to truth, to God, to love. This awareness is extremely important, and the pathwork deals with it in a very intensive way in order to help you avoid one of the most insidious obstructions, self-deception. So, and you know, here he makes it sound like really, woo, bad, you know, but the truth is we're all continuously self-deceiving ourselves all the time, and we can't not self-deceive ourselves until we wake up a little more, or we grow, or we learn, you know. So in some ways, you know, like he's trying to help penetrate sort of the dense fog of denial that we have around some of this stuff. But at the same time, I don't think that, you know, like sometimes I think our ego then makes a drama out of it, right? You know, and if you think about it, right, you know, we're in resistance until we're not. And so the more that we can certainly be aware, you know, and of the contradictory levels, like he says, you know, that's giving us a long, you know, way. But I've still feel my, you know, resistance, my refusal to take on something more deeply or do something right. And so to me, that just means, well, you know, I'm not ready yet somehow. And I'm going to trust the universe to put me in a corner when it's ready for me to be ready. Does that make sense? I mean, you know, like I can worry a lot about a million things that I should probably improve in myself or face or, you know, transform or, you know, and yet, you know, it's like I used to, you know, that was part of my idealized self-image, was it just, would worry about all of the, and I wouldn't know which one to work on. And so I wouldn't work on any of them. Right. And then, and it was all this outer will, stuff anyway. And so there just came a point where I felt like, I think this is simpler than all of that. Right. It has to be. So maybe we can just trust to live our lives, do the best we can, pay attention. And when it's time to really transform something, it's going to come up in spades in our life. It's going to be right there in our face. And maybe we don't even fully transform it then, but we're going to work it good, and move it a little bit and get another layer of the onion ring peeled down. And I think that's, it's like we can relax and just let the universe and let our life be our guide, right? And then consciously commit, when something is up, to not becoming a victim, not, letting yourself, wallow in it in some way, right? But willingly kind of take it on and explore. Wow, what's the gem in this, right? Difficulty. And so I think that's the best way that we can sort of proactively and act on that commitment, right? Because we're saying we're making this commitment, and then, well, what do? We have to like practice every day or something, no, we already are, life is going to make you practice every day. Just relax and live your life and try to live it a little more consciously.
I can easily see parts of me that would happily give up the working or the self-facing, kind of taking that, what you just said, for a ride, and kind of turning it on its head, like, oh, okay, I just wait till there's a crisis, right? And then
but that's not going to work, right? So you're too wise for this. Of course these voices are going to do that, right? Yeah. That's the temptation, right? There's always the temptation to take us in the other direction, right? But when you get to a certain level of consciousness, you recognize it for what it is, right?
Yeah.
And so then the prayer might be, in that moment, not trying to stiffen your resolve in some outer will way, but recognizing, this is still a huge temptation for me. I'm praying, God, help me face this, help me, go into it. And, most of the time, it'll come up in our life or in our meditation if we make that prayer, and come up in a way that we can, maybe make a step towards deeper resolving or whatever. So it is, it's like we are deeply unconsciously hiding and avoiding growing up, waking up, all of these things, everything we want. We are, backpedaling 90 miles an hour. Don't worry about it. That's what we do. That's how humans are. And pay attention to the ones that you're doing, and recognize the cost that it might have for you in your specific life, in this moment, in this way, and you will change. You'll change organically through trial and error. That's how rats learn to run mazes. Is they do it the wrong way and it doesn't bring the right results, and then they finally figure out, a way that gets the results, and then they start, remembering it as best they can. And so, if we spend all of our time being frustrated because we didn't get the maze right, right then, or we're recognizing we're even too lazy to run the maze, then, it's like, it doesn't do any good to moralize against ourselves about that, right? The guide always is asking us to try to avoid moralizing.
And that's the resistance. That's what's making me so mad. I'm like, I should be doing this already. And that's often my block, doing this with self-compassion. I get it now. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. So he says, when we own up to the contrary ego level hidden beyond the goodwill, you may not even understand why certain results are still lacking despite your conscious commitment to truth, to God, to love. Or you may know very well that you're avoiding, right, doing the work that you should be doing. This awareness is extremely important, and the pathwork deals with it in a very intensive way in order to help you avoid one of the most insidious obstructions, self-deception. And so self-deception is just like this consciousness that we're talking about, where we recognize what we're avoiding, or we're, all of that. So we search for and bring out the negative part of the self that has the no, right? We want not to moralize against it, but to welcome it and let it express and understand it more fully. You will learn the courage, humility, and honesty to expose this part. The part that even says, I want to resist. I want to be spiteful. I want to have it my way or else. Only when the secret crevices of your psychic substance yield up and expose these areas can you begin, often with a lot of struggle, to change this very negative level, this darker part of the personality. When this part remains hidden, you are split and do not understand why your positive endeavors fail to go further. And so that's always, like where, we may not see that we have this resistance. So it's always important to, like if we're not getting the results we want, to suspect that there must be resistance. Then there comes a point when you have won this particular battle. At this stage, you can wholeheartedly embrace and trust the surrender to divine consciousness. But again, this does not come in one fell swoop. At first, this surrender must be fought for every time. You need self-discipline to remind yourself. Although resistance is gone, the outer self is still conditioned to the old functioning and automatically forges ahead on the top level of the mind. At this stage, you need to acquire a new habit pattern. So, here is a slightly different kind of thing, but still for some people, again, trying to, like use self-discipline in these kinds of outer will ways is not so useful, but there is a kind of habit base to this. And so for me, it's mostly just trying to, get conscious of the pattern in the habit so that I can wake up in the midst of the pattern and make a different choice. And usually at that point in time, there's not a lot of charge or demand, it's just habit, right? It's just unconsciously. So if I can wake up, oh, I'm in that habit again, right? Then that's all usually that is needed. And once you keep doing that, right, then every time you fall into the habit, you correct yourself, right? You correct yourself without judgment, without frustration, without anything, just, make a different choice. Perhaps you can do it where you are relatively free, but then you still find your old obstinacy, distrust, and forgetfulness where problems persist. Only little by little do you reach the state where a new habit pattern is instituted, where the active self-surrender to the all is actualized, where it manifests and where it permeates all your thoughts and perceptions, your decisions and actions, your feelings and reactions. So in some ways, for me now, like a lot of it is kind of boiling down to, what is, right? Because my ego mind is always in this place of wanting to argue with what is. And this first act of surrender, which feels like it doesn't have to be the final act, but if I can accept and surrender to and be with what is actually in the moment happening, then some other movement can possibly take place. But what my defenses tend to do, right, is something arises out of the, life's possibilities that doesn't suit me. And I immediately go into defense, into reaction, into an inner no, physically in my body and my, emotions, that kind of thing. So, it's like we can begin to feel that energetically as well. And it can be also helpful, to recognize, oh, here's I'm in my no, I'm in my contraction. And again, from the place of recognizing it to the place of actually being able to not contract anymore, because that it kind of becomes an automatic thing all of its own, right? And so there's no outer will part that can, make my defense stop defending in my body or in my feelings. And so there's this way in which, if we can just be conscious that that's what we're doing and hold the space and not, sort of judge it or act it out in the world, I think that's sort of the cauldron of the transformation. And that means, what's present within us, what's present in the world, what's, all of that. So the discipline in some ways is just this practice and noticing how many times a day, something happens and I don't, and noticing what the result of that is, which is usually some kind of hassle or chaos or difficulty. And every time when I meet the world, and it's maybe not perfectly how I want it, but I can accept and surrender and stay calm about it, somehow magically it transforms or something new comes, right? So I find it very practical for me, because when I get into my outer resistance, it's like immediate world feedback, it's like everything starts going haywire and I get more and more resistance from the world itself. And if I, can calm and just be with it and see, call in higher self, whatever, trust that something is here for me to, see and understand, then lots of times miracles happen and new possibilities arrive. So he says, he's going to talk about here, these ways that we actualize, and what it looks like to be in the unitive state. So he says, first, let me speak about the relationship between outer and inner life. There are those who claim only inner life is important, and they prohibit the inevitable movement from the inner to the outer life because they do not see the limitation and actual falsity of this idea. If unification and divine process are truly in movement, the inner content must express itself in outer form. In short, the outer life must mirror the inner life in every possible respect. But if your consciousness ignores this truth or even strongly embraces the opposite belief that the outer does not matter, then you prohibit the flow of the whole process. If this happens, the more radiant energetic matter cannot express itself on the levels of coarser matter and thereby refine it. You may recall that in one of the more recent lectures, I described how creation attempts to fill the void. Every human being helps in this task of refining the coarser matter by bringing inner spiritual reality into outer expression. The false concept that the outer level does not matter encases the inner spiritual truth and beauty behind a wall, separating it from the material reality. Many movements and spiritual schools of thought preach asceticism and the denial of the outer life under the guise that this furthers inner spiritual life. This distortion is a reaction to the equally distorted opposite extreme, which position claims that outer form is more important than inner content and may even negate that an inner reality or content exists at all. True inner growth must eventually also manifest outwardly, though not necessarily with the speed designated by the outer-oriented person, who, in expecting an instant change, is making mistakes in judgment. When the outer form exists without the inner content, it is a temporary cover that must break down, like the mask, even though it resembles the glorious perfection of divine reality and expression. When outer form exists unconnected with an organic inner content, it must disintegrate. If it exists on faulty premises based on appearance, on confusing the outer life with the inner, then the outer form must first crumble before it can be rebuilt as an organic expression of the inner movement and content. Only when the outer form has crashed and the inner chaos been exposed and thoroughly eliminated can inner beauty build outer beauty, inner harmony build outer harmony, and the inner abundance build outer abundance. A clear vision of this principle is necessary for creating a visualization of your own movement, which can then manifest in your outer life as a result of your inner progress. I shall now discuss specific manifestations. This is my favorite part of the lecture. I shall now discuss specific manifestations that take place in a person who is already deeply anchored in the process of actualizing the divine life into his or her ego consciousness. So again, we're not getting rid of the ego. We're, bringing out more and more of our true nature. And then the ego becomes a servant in a way to that inner light. So he says, what are the inner and outer attitudes, manifestations, and expressions of such a person? First of all decisions, big or small, are made on the basis of self-surrender, where the little self surrenders to the God self. It steps aside and allows the inner wisdom to permeate it. It's part of what I was trying to decide if I can pause long enough to do that, right? It usually works. In this process, the personality realizes that there is nothing that is unimportant. Every thought, every opinion, every interpretation, every mode of reacting is given a chance to be permeated by the greater consciousness. At this stage, the resistance to pay attention to everything that occurs is overcome, and a new habit has been formed so that the divine process is now self-perpetuating. I think one of the things that happens is, like this resistance of facing ourselves, which comes a lot from our shame and our ego, like self-judgment and stuff. When we no longer are self-judging and that, it's like, then we're just curious about it all, right? And that is what will then allow and, welcome it all to be permeated by greater consciousness. It's like, instead of, cringing in shame when we realize something inside of us, we just perk up and get curious. What was that? What's going on? And go in and explore. And there's not any shame or blame or criticism in that, if, ideally. So at this stage, the resistance to pay attention to everything that occurs is overcome. A new habit has been formed, and the divine process is now self-perpetuating. The inner self is sufficiently freed to manifest so that it can send forth warnings, disagreements, advice, and then leave the decision of whether or not to follow such advice to the outer personality. This is already a state of grace. So, and many of us, these things happen periodically, maybe not so frequently, but the more that we do the work, the more frequently. So we do have, usually some experiences, no matter where we are in the path of, this higher self, sometimes, waking us up, our inner conscience, chomping at us, not in, like just, reminding us something is amiss inside, right? And if we don't, feel afraid to face it, then it's nothing but learning and growing. So confidence and trust, in our guidance have been established as a result of repeated proof that divine reality brings truth, wisdom, goodness, and joy. And I think most of us have had some experience of, inner insight, self-recognition that seems to come maybe even out of the blue, or, where do our thoughts come from? Where does the self-realization that in this work that we do, maybe all of it is offered by our guides and guardian angels, as we can receive it. And at first, the divine will is not trusted and can be confused with untrustworthy parental authority, which may often have proclaimed something as good for the child, but really proved not to be so. And at the stage in question, this confusion would no longer exist, right? The self will be fully aware that divine will is truly in accordance with all that the heart may possibly desire. This trust grows gradually every time you overcome your resistance and go into the apparent abyss of surrender, giving up narrow self-will. And in some ways, certain things are much harder than others. And oftentimes some of the really intense big things are easier than the small everyday things in going into that self-surrender. So thoughts of truth will be sent forth into your being, notwithstanding the limited thoughts you still habitually follow. You will hear an inner voice instructing you with a wisdom and a unifying spirit that your outer self cannot possibly produce. According to this wisdom, there is never any need to hate, to feel self-rejection, or to reject others. The answers and revelations will show the oneness and unity of all, which will completely eliminate fear, anxiety, friction, and despair. And this is part of what we're talking about, even, the oneness and unity within our internal splits, right? And the inner child and the, confusion and conflict. And when we truly go in and see what's going on, we recognize that there's no need for self-rejection and rejection of others, right? That it wasn't what we thought, and it's okay. And this is beautiful, place of peace that we can come into when we find that truth and reality. So surrendering the knowledge of the limited ego to the knowledge of the deeper self, this is where, like if we're into, it has to be a certain way, right? Then we're locking ourselves away from this deeper knowledge. This is why we have to kind of expand and open and not know anything, right? Let go of what we think we know for a little while. We don't have to abandon completely, but we have to allow a crack in the cosmic egg for new insight to come in. And so as to exert all energy, courage, honesty, and self-discipline toward making the deeper knowledge self-perpetuating, which will lead to ultimate fulfillment. So the more we can tune into our guidance to this inner, deeper voice within us, that's not our, defense, our personality, our idealized self-image, right? Then the more, we do find the joy of just being who we are, of, living life, and it becomes simpler, less, painful and complex. So without this as the essential foundation, no joy, pleasure, or fulfillment can exist for long. Even while they do exist, the fulfillment becomes unbearable and finally cannot be accepted. So this is the other thing is, like without this place, this development, right, we really can't stay with the pleasure fully. And he says, what we will find is an immense security. So see if you can close your eyes for a minute. Let's go ahead and do this a bit, as a kind of little guided visualization. I'm going to actually bring up a slightly different document here, I think. No. Oh, a second. Okay, let me go back. I have this other version of these, but I think we'll just stay with this because I'm not finding it. So, okay, close your eyes for a minute and just see if you can let yourself visualize these possibilities that the guide is saying, and sort of feel them, imagine them, energetically, like sensing it's inside of you, right? The guide says, like this is who we really are ultimately, and all of the other aspects of our personality are just, overlayers. And so again, it helps to kind of connect with this. So see if you can imagine this immense security, a security you gain when you discover the reality of the spiritual world within and operative around you. You know the deep peace of the meaning of your life and of all life. You intuitively know the connections and are permeated by a sense of fulfillment and safety that surpasses all words. It's not just a theory, but an experiential fact, which you recognize again and again. There's always a way out of every darkness, and therefore never a reason to despair. You will know that nothing happens without good cause, and that you are always capable of using whatever experience to heighten your blissful life. Dark spots become opportunities for further light and no longer need be avoided, whether they be pain, guilt, fear, or whatever. Again and again, you will experience the wide open system of creation. You will know and make use of your own creative powers rather than feeling a helpless object in a fixed world. Peace and knowledge of the rightness of life come from realizing that your world, your experience, your life is your creation. This opens many new doors. You no longer live in the two-dimensional world of either or. You avail yourself of the many-faceted reality at your disposal. The confidence and fearlessness in which you live release an immense amount of energy and joy. As you lose your fear of pain because you can experience pain, your pain ceases to exist. As you lose your fear of anger and hate because you can accept your own anger and hate, they no longer exist. The energy is now free for other, better expressions. You now become capable of pleasure and joy and no longer need to reject them. Instead of creating loneliness, you can create relationships, the bliss of the most intimate relationship with one mate and the satisfaction of deep, open friendships. Pleasure will no longer frighten you because you now know in every pore and cell of your being that you deserve it. Your every pore and every cell are expressions of a consciousness which is now in harmony with your God consciousness. Many of you find yourself in an interim state where you experience new joys and pleasures you never knew existed. Life opens up for you as it never did. But you also find yourself in the position where you cannot yet bear too much of it. This is because you have not totally surrendered to the God consciousness, or you have not yet sufficiently faced negative aspects in you and still cling to them. Hence you fear pleasure, which becomes more frightening than the grayness you still wish for and create. An inevitable manifestation of the continuous process of actualizing your deep self is the incredible creativity that blossoms out from your inner life. You are creative in ideas, alternatives, talents, richness of feelings, and the ability to live with and relate to others. You find the treasure of your creative powers, the wealth of your feelings, and the fullness of your own being. Only as you go through the emptiness can you find that fullness. And that requires courage, which comes when you pray or meditate for it. You must want the fullness and commit yourself to it. This fullness of feelings, this wealth of creative ideas, and the ability to live in the now with all its excitement and peace will deepen and widen. It will not consist of mutually exclusive opposites, but of different facets of the same fullness. The times when you seem to lose it will become less often and less severe. Since you now have the power to create, you can create a deeper intuitive understanding of yourself, others, and life. Your total attitude of relaxation about every part of yourself eliminates the need to cover up and escape from anything in you, and therefore must make you aware of other people on their deepest levels. You read their thoughts and understand the deeper connections within and between them, so that you can help them and have empathy for them and love them. You need never fear and defend against others with your destructive ego defenses. Your health will be glowing. You will have vitality and energy as you never had before. The energy you expend will always be replenished and more so. All your functions will be in perfect working order. All your physical systems will be coordinated. This will affect your outer looks. You cannot help being beautiful when you are in such vibrant health and harmony. It will show in the grace and poise of your movements, the balance and coordination you express in the tone of your voice, in the sparkle of your eyes, in the brilliance of the skin, and the suppleness of your form. The improvement will come in varying degrees, but it is always possible. Think of it as your possibility. You will be able to materialize it because you already are essentially that person. You cannot make it manifest if you either have a stake in believing you cannot be like that, or if you want all that vitality, health, radiance, and beauty for egotistical reasons or competitive power drives. Then the inner guilt will not let you make it happen. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing that he's saying there, and reminding us that it's essentially who we already are, right? And then what blocks it from us is that we either don't believe that we could be like that, or we want it, for the mask's purposes, right? So there are, of course, those who have these desirable qualities only in outer expression. In that case, the time will come when these outer forms must break down before they can be rebuilt with inner content. There is an innate system of divine justice built into all consciousness. Whenever a life expression is sought that does not come as a harmonious outer result of an inner reality, it will either not succeed or will break down after it has been created. Inner unity with your eternal self makes it possible to use your creative ability to explore any area of universal truth you wish to comprehend. I like that one, right? Like there's a way that I think when we fully open to this place, our own inner, interests, it's like, we can maybe, access the Akashic records, or we can follow and know anything that we really want to study, and many people I've seen also as they open, their musical talents or their artistic expressions, there's new ways that, we kind of pour out of ourselves at this point. And he says, you now know the power of thought and consciousness, and you can focus it as a result of the self-discipline you have learned. Thus, you can cultivate a creative receptivity to experience the eternal state beyond physical death. This perception is not reliable as long as you seek it out of your own fear of death. It is reliable only when you do not fear death, because you now can die, just as you can be in pain. Whenever you want something because you fear its opposite, the result cannot be reliable. You can only create out of fullness, not out of need and poverty. So the difficulty is initially creating fullness. Seeking the opposite of what you fear as an escape and leads to a split rather than to unification. Exactly the opposite road must be taken. You must die many deaths right now, every day in your life, in order to discover the eternality of life, and only then will you live fearlessly. How can you die all these little deaths? Follow exactly the process I described. Let go of the little ego, the little opinions, the negative reactions you have such investment in. You have to die to those. The little ego with its little investments must die. In other places, he says we're not really trying to kill off the ego, but in this, example, he's saying it's like a shaman's death. We have to surrender it. In that way, you can transcend death and intuitively experience the reality of life ongoing. When you live without fear of death because you experience it so many times, you will know that in principle, physical death is the same. You will find it to be so by temporarily letting go of all the smaller self, only to find a larger self awakening, which then unifies with the little self. So you see, not even the little self of the ego really dies. It is enlarged and united with the larger self, not given up. But it appears to be given up and must be ready to take the plunge. When this happens, a measure of eternality will manifest in your life right now. It manifests not only by eliminating fear of dying, but also in a more immediate practical sense. It will keep you vital and youthful, giving you, as it were, a foretaste of the timelessness and agelessness of true life. Another outward manifestation is abundance. Since real spiritual life is limitless abundance, to some degree, you must begin to manifest that which you actualize, that when you actualize your divine self. If you can make room in your consciousness for outer abundance as a reflection of universal abundance, you will create and experience it. If you want to experience it because you fear poverty, you will create a split. The abundance you create out of fear is not built on reality, and its flimsy structure must be crushed again so that you can let yourself be poor and dissolve the illusion of poverty. Only after this can the real unified richness grow. Only when you first can be poor can you allow yourself to be rich as an outer expression of inner content. Then you will not want to be rich for the sake of power or for outer gains in the eyes of others or out of greed and fear, but to be a true divine expression of the abundance that is the nature of the universe. Another outer manifestation of the continual process of actualizing divine life is the proper balance of everything. The balance of assertion and giving in. The spontaneous knowing when one or the other is appropriate comes from within. Or consider the proper balance of right selflessness and right selfishness, as opposed to wrong selflessness and wrong selfishness. All these balances and dualities will become elements in a spontaneous unification and harmony. I think in another lecture, he goes into, looking at those differences between, right selflessness and, right selfishness and the wrong ones as well. So intuitive knowledge of when, what, and how will come not because you decide it with your mind, but as a manifestation of inner truth and beauty that reaches expression on the outer level appropriately and beautifully. There will be a poise and a beauty in your whole bearing. A courtesy and chivalry will emanate from you that will never be ridiculous or invite being taken advantage of. There will be order without a trace of compulsiveness. Order in all things of your life. Order and beauty are related and interdependent. There will be generosity, a giving and receiving in one ongoing stream. There will come a deep ability to be grateful and to appreciate others, yourself, and the whole creative universe. A new freedom to be soft and vulnerable will make you truly strong and take away false shame. Concurrently, you will experience a new freedom to be strong and assertive, even angry, without false guilt. You will know and act from within because you are in constant contact with the wisdom, love, and truth of your inner divine reality. The emotional loneliness that is the self-chosen lot of so many people gradually begins to disappear among you, my friends. In your development, you learn to be real, to function without your masks and pretenses. Consequently, you begin to feel comfortable in closer intimacy. As you simultaneously cease to fear the pain, pleasure syndrome, true ecstasy, and deep fusion on all levels must give you the deepest fulfillment a human can experience. You will progress to new heights and depths of experience where you explore the inner universe in unison. Loneliness and the torture of conflict about the need for and fear of closeness will no longer exist. Such relationships fuse on all levels. The abundance of the universe expresses itself in all areas of life. You will feel in it the sharing, the respect, the warmth, the ease and comfort with which you can be intimate and fused with another person, or in giving to and receiving from another person. The security of your own feelings will make you equally secure about being loved. You will experience the deep satisfaction of giving, helping, fulfilling a task, and of being devoted to doing so. You will rejoice in the ongoing creative process that is at work in it. All of these are gauges for you, my friends. These gauges are not to be used to put yourself down in impatience and intolerance. They are gauges you can use to create deliberate inner visualization about any and all of these life expressions. And then you will perhaps be more strongly motivated to search further for what still stands in the way. This lecture will give you many tools and a lot of material for your work. The love of the universe spreads over all of you and reaches deep into your hearts. My dearest friends, be blessed, be God. Okay, any comments in closing here? How did you, were you able to kind of do that as a visualization inside?
Yes, but at the same time, unfortunately, measure it against my own sluggish state of consciousness. And,
So it feels like what it kind of highlights the gap in between, like where you, so yeah, so this is where he's saying, don't, see if you can, like maybe even explore that, right? Because, there's this way in which, you don't want to use it to kind of put yourself down or feel like it's not possible. And if that's coming up inside of you, then it might be something to look at a little deeper, right? Who is that part of you that, I get that, it's not something that you live every day, right?
I don't feel that it's not possible. Because
Okay.
I've had glimpses of it.
Right.
Okay. But I just feel that at the moment I'm a long way down.
We all are.
Down the track,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the humility of being human. We all are. And it'll take maybe all of this lifetime and probably more before we fully actualize this. And yet, I'm amazed, like as I, read through in my own journey, like many of these resonate much more deeply. I remember when I first graduated from TP, it was like, yeah, like the gap was huge. And I just felt, like, long way to go, but more and more, right. Like, and it's not all the time, obviously, or everything, but there is a kind of experience of being lived through by the greater self. And it happens when we can get out of self-consciousness, and then other times, what lives through me is my lower self instead of my greater consciousness. But, there's not a lot of mask, right? And I think that that's a part of it is, that this, self-judgments, this need to perform or be a certain way or show up a certain way and constantly worried about how others are going to think about us and stuff. Somehow, we can, get more comfortable with just ourselves being who we are. And that to me is the key, because if we are not comfortable with our own selves, then yeah, we can't be free, and we can't, express ourselves freely, which is then what to me the higher self can be, channeled on, right? If we're constructing or manipulating in any way, the higher self doesn't come through.
Yeah, I feel like at this particular time in my life, I'm being tested quite a bit and not living up to the test.
So then that's where you go forgiveness, for the time you grabbed your gun or whatever it was that you did, right? It's like we really do have to, instead of feeling bad, and I think there is an inner conscience that is there as well. So, we're not trying to brush that away. You can find your true remorse for, where you missed the mark, right? But if we,
Patience. I missed the
yeah,
mark quite a bit on patience.
yeah, it's a huge one. It's a huge one.
Yeah.
And so just recommit every time you do and pray for help. And seek to understand and hold and respect your impatience. And then, when you can do that, then your impatience can also relax a little and try to work with you, right? It's like, and then it's still going to get triggered, because to me, that's one of the biggest things that really is. I have some hymns about that too, that like our sense of, forcing current and doing and acting, and impatience. And it's very hard to learn this kind of power of slowing and relaxing into the pace of the universe, or how it is in each moment. And for me, I see it mostly like, I'm sure you're talking about as a caregiver, it's hard, but, I haven't hit that place yet so much, but, just if I'm trying to go somewhere, right, I'm in a flow, I'm trying to get something done, and something gets in my way. I mean, literally, I'm liable to like just, bowl them out of the way, right? It's like I have absolutely no tolerance for, all of a sudden stopping in this movement of, accomplishment or whatever I'm up to. And so it's like, that's where, and I cannot stand to stand in lines, right? If I'm waiting a long time in lines, I just hate that. So that's my place with impatience. But I think it shows in all of different ways in our lives. And it's a part of that, trusting the flow of the universe is better than what we think is supposed to be, somehow in our mind, and letting go and being with what is instead of what we want or think should be.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's, try that and see, but I'm with you. Impatience is a tough one. And again, I think we just have to keep forgiving. I don't know how many hymns I have, that time and time and again, we just go back to, forgiveness for each time that I'm knowing the truth, knowing what I choose, knowing, and not being able to manifest it or live it, or, going back unconscious, going back into reaction. And if we get tangled up in that with judgment, it's kind of, to me, the way the dark forces keep us trapped inside there, because that's the best way good people will feel unworthy of the change that they're seeking. And in a way, we can't do it. You can't be any more patient than you are. There is an angel of patience that if you give your best to work in it and praying and trying, that will come to you in kind of its right timing, right? It's like where we make a little effort, God sends a huge help to that. And when we try and we go into despair because we fail, we can't receive that help then. So, keep at her.
Thank you, darling.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Darlene. That's
Yeah.
the beautiful words.
Good. Anybody else before we close?
No, I feel much better. I'm so happy I came.
Yeah,
Feel a
good for
little
you.
bit calmer. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, and thank you too, Frank. You always have such interesting insight and honesty.
Thank you, Judy.
Thanks.
It's good to see you.
You too, friend. Have a
Take
good
care.
night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Bye
everybody.
bye.